been sick, but apparently Bart is here. Good job, hey Bart.
Get a little bit better.
You can't stay sick forever.
Yeah. True. Bart is here, and down in Disney World. The Newmans.
Mickey
That's
Mouse.
right. Y'all remember a lot of you guys met the Newmans for the first time last week, and they're at Disney World, so I'm sure they're tuning in because there's nothing to do there. They're probably bored, silly, so they're probably tuning in. Or will when we upload. Now the Newmans are down in Disney. Newmans are down in Disney World, and we should probably do a shout out to CB because she always has a section where she's just late. So this is her shout out for the first 15 minutes that she'll see later, and then she'll be here. No, I'm kidding. Glad to see everybody. Oh, this has been a crazy week. I say this sometimes, probably too often, but this particular week in this study was a crazy week in general, and it's not going to stop for a few weeks. But finishing this part of the study was hard. It was hard. We immediately recognized last week that it would take 2 weeks, because when you're looking at this issue, today's cultural issue being gay marriage, homosexual relationships, that kind of stuff. The two things you immediately realize is you've got to first ground yourself in what is truth, that was last week, and then this week, what is love? Two things that seem obvious, which are not obvious at all when you dig into them. So that's why it divided into 2 weeks. And then this week, oh my goodness, we're cramming all kind of stuff in. And there it goes, we need 3. I said, no, we'll stop at 2 and move on to the next cultural issue. So
I was just saying,
tell them about your week. What happened to you the last 24 hours?
I delivered a baby in the middle of the night.
Wait, first, let me back up. First, this is probably the first time, maybe in 18 years, not quite, pretty close, all of our kids had something to do last night. We were alone. So we're doing all this stuff, we drop the last kid off, yay, push him off on somebody else. And we show up at the house, and we don't want to go anywhere. We just heat up some food. Yeah, we just heated up food in the microwave on the tray. We're going to watch a movie. Normally, when I say we're going to watch something on TV, we're talking Heiser, TV, total boring stuff. No. We're going with a full-blown, sinful, secular Hollywood movie. And about the time the food comes out of the microwave, she gets called to the hospital. Okay, so all I got ruined. But anyway, so tell folks you did.
Just deliver a baby, that's all.
Oh, I just shouted out to you for the late section of CB. You got here early.
I did.
You got here really
I was
early.
actually earlier, but I was talking. I'm sorry.
So tell me.
So I was just on call this weekend, and I was like talking when I rounded this morning before I left to come take a shower. I said, okay, I'm teaching Sunday school where we use my phone and we're YouTubing and videoing, and so if you call me, it messes up the whole thing.
She's warning the hospital, do not call
So
me.
I'm like, please don't call me and ask for Tylenol or something. If it can wait between 9 and 10, please let it wait. So if something happens, I might have to answer my call.
Who did you bring into the world? Boy, girl, not named.
This was a girl week. I have had 4 girls delivered back to back. Thursday through Saturday.
They're taking over.
Girl,
Girl power, yeah.
What are
So,
those 4 babies?
4 baby girls this week. We were talking about homosexuality and how, man, sometimes you feel like God is saying, yes, this is what we need to be talking about, because we talked about it here. We went to City Church and asked about something that happened a few weeks before, like
There was a conflict in the parking lot. Two students were fighting.
How much you can say, but anyway, it had to do with homosexuality.
Which we didn't know at the time. Everybody just thought it was a fight, 2 people arguing.
And then there was one
That's
other.
when we're like, what? It had to do with what?
Do you remember the other thing that was homosexual?
This week? Until we're off the notes? We start notes?
Anyway,
No.
anyway, it was like God was saying, yes, you need to be talking about this. You need to be preparing people. It's everywhere. Oh, I shared what we were talking about in Sunday school with a colleague friend, and she said, I need to hear that because I have a wedding invitation for a gay wedding on my counter.
And she immediately thought, I have no idea how I'm supposed to react.
Right, a strong Christian.
And this is someone who's a very strong Christian, teaches all that stuff, and she just had no idea, what do I do?
So we were like, yes, God wants to us all.
So of course, what did we say? Joel Travis said, you like and subscribe. That's what we told her. But we don't know if she did.
But anyway, it's something that I grapple with. How many people know someone, like Joel and I started naming people from our childhood church, from other churches we've been involved in, where I work, nurses, colleagues. How many know somebody who's gay? So, I mean, and they're close enough personal friends or family or somebody that you know and love, and you are trying to grapple with, how do I walk the Christian walk and adhere to scripture and truth, but speak to them in a loving way, and that's what we feel convicted to talk about. So.
And I'll throw this in here, and it'll probably come up sometime in the notes, or sometime with what we're talking, but if not, I'll throw it in now too. Before your generation, all the young people in here, the older generation understands it's the old moral majority, which was built in the late 70s and really came into fruition in the 80s, led by Jerry Falwell and some Christians. Very good motives, right motives and all that. But because it focused so, again, I don't bash it all. I appreciate what the moral majority did back then. That was just an organization of Christians that wanted to stop all this immorality. It built kind of a political movement, which generally Ronald Reagan took a lot of advantage of, and a lot of those folks then supported him. So it dates back to like the 1980s election. But anyway, my point is saying that when I'm looking back now and what the church needs to address now is actually some fallout from that, because even though that's not how those ministers meant it, it quickly turned into, we hate homosexuals. Or at least that, I shouldn't say that, because I guarantee if you interview 90% of them, they would not have said that. But the impression was created by the media and because of some Christian actions that hate was involved. And that's part of what we're having to fight through now. And so many people slam the door in the gospel because you Christians hate us. And even if the answer to the question is you don't go to the gay wedding, it has nothing to do with hating the person. And so we're going to kind of hit on that, because that's kind of a nuance we need to make from the kind of what's left over from the moral majority.
But I remember Jerry Falwell, even on television, because he would get interviewed in all these talk shows. Phil, you don't know who Phil Donahue is, but he always said this: listen, in our country, every person has a right to misbehave. And I like how he put that.
Yeah.
Whether it's adultery, homosexuality, we all have a right to misbehave. It doesn't mean we have to support it or like what they do.
That's right.
But and I like the way he put that. It was not a hateful thing, but everyone has a right to misbehave.
And it was more that the media and the pushback portrayed it as hate, and that became the narrative, which is what you see today. You see narratives constantly created, because now media was invasive then. Oh my goodness, it's a billion times more invasive now. So narratives are created, dominate the culture, and die in a 7-day period now. It's amazing, unbelievable.
But these are all things that we got to decide before we get the invitation.
Yeah.
We always hear that before. You better decide what you're going to do before you get in the back seat. You better decide what you're going to do before you get approached to this. Make these decisions right now while you can think clearly, because you will get these invitations. These things do happen. So.
Right.
What I love is with Rosaria, this lady that gave her testimony, and
Who we're going to see some more of today. She's just phenomenal.
her pastor friend. Her premise was, I'm going to interview about why you guys hate us.
That was the book she was
That
writing.
was what she was writing, but she came to find out because he didn't walk away. He invested in her over, she said, 500 meals.
Over 2 years, 500 meals. We found out in today's video that I think it was today's video, or was it in part of last week's? Anyway, that the church was then behind them, praying for them. And anyway, I think it's in today, where she talks about going. Okay, well, I just find it funny that she said, one of the deacons told her one day, they said, Rosario. If we knew the bloodshed, the bloody fallout from your conversion, I'm not sure we would have been praying so hard. They were talking about how many ripples were created by her conversion. But anyway.
Anyway, can you summarize quickly?
Yes, I'm going to now have to summarize the review. I'm not going to do much review. All I'm going to say is we would have read the Great Commission, but we're going to skip it, because again, our premise is you have a job. You have one and only, you You have one and only one job: make disciples, not just converts, of all nations. The mission will not change. Do not get distracted from the mission. So remember, that is the mission, is to make a disciple. Period. That immediately begins allowing you to understand this issue about whether you go to the gay wedding or not. Okay, then we've got a little review here. I'm going to skip 1 and 2 because that's from last week. The third review is we identified truth last week. I'm at Roman numeral 2C. We identified the truth. When you become a follower of Jesus, I like this. When you become a follower of Jesus, you are committing to the reality that Jesus is the truth. That's what we established last week. Other folks can disagree with it, but if everyone in this room claims to be a follower, that's what you're committing to. You're committing to Jesus is the truth. The Bible reveals him, and you have entered a covenant. I'm specifically using that word covenant today for a reason. And you have entered into a covenant with Christ to image him until death. There's a line in that statement. I'm going to read it one more time. What if I can find out where I just was? Okay, I'm going to read it one more time. When you become a follower of Jesus, you are committing to the reality that Jesus is the truth. The Bible reveals him, and you have entered a covenant with Christ to image him until death. That's just one statement of what your mission is. Okay? That is why the Bible, I'm throwing this in there, that's why the Bible uses, do you recognize how often, from Genesis chapter 3 to the very last chapter of the Bible in Revelation, and tons of chapters and verses in between, you have the imagery of a marriage. The church, your relationship with Christ is described as a marriage. The church's relationship with Christ is described as a marriage. Marriage is key to the foundation of the Bible and to the very last chapter. That is why the Bible uses a covenant marriage as an analogy all the way through it. That's not a mistake or an accident. Okay, that's my review, much shorter. So, what is marriage? Who created marriage? That's not an R cue, that's a real cue. Who created marriage? Okay, God created marriage. That's the church answer. What I'm asking you to do is you have to believe that. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, you have to believe that. If you don't, you're not really a follower of Jesus Christ. Ouch. I'm just going to move on past that. There are things you have to believe. Otherwise, and we may skip this part of Rosaria today, but there's a part in here where she talks about how in the gay community and just in the community in general in the world, how people just pick and choose what they like. And I like the way she does it. She takes her hands and as she's talking about, I don't like this, I cut that verse out, cut that verse. And she's doing her hands like this, she goes, then you have a paper mache Jesus. You have a Jesus of your own making, which is what I mean by there are fundamental truths that if you are a follower of Jesus Christ, you believe. There just are. And if you don't, then you should leave. It sounds terrible, but it's the truth. That's what you are. So I'll just leave it at that. So who created marriage? God did. Who gets to define it? God does. If God created it, he gets to define it. What I mean by that, it's not the state. We're now arguing whether the state gets the right to define. How does the state get the right to define something that it did not create, it should not regulate? That's not what it is. But anyway, that's just an interesting little dynamic of our culture in a democracy. But marriage had, for most of the 5,000 years of human history, marriage had nothing to do with the state. It is a commitment before God. That's what it is. It has nothing to do with the legality and licenses and blood tests and those sort of things. Okay, where am I? Last week we saw that God himself is truth, and that truth was personified in Jesus Christ. God alone defines marriage. God defines marriage in the Bible, Genesis 1:27-28.
Then God said, let us make humankind in our image after our likeness. So they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the cattle and over all the earth and over all the creatures that move on the earth. God created humankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them.
So there are your
God
genders.
blessed them and said to them.
Wait. So there are your genders. Number one, God created male and female, and he said to them for a purpose. Here's the purpose.
God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply.
Right there. A homosexual relationship cannot do that, which means it's not marriage. Period. Because God, you just said, God defines marriage. Marriage is defined by a man and a woman who are procreating to spread, to create, as you go back to our prior studies, to create the family, the human family that will unite with the spiritual family and be God's eternal family. That's the whole point. What does God want? Yeah, it's the book that we handed out. We studied this for 4 weeks. What does God want? A family. How does he create a human family? Through marriage. That's why it's one man and one woman. It's not just because we want it to be one man and one woman. That's the purpose of marriage, and the creator of marriage defines it. Does that make sense? When I was going through this, I just realized it's really just a logical argument and an understanding of purposes. That's really all it is. And so that's what we're walking through.
You did this already.
Okay, I did that
So
already.
Genesis
Mary's pushing me. Genesis 2,
Then the
22.
Lord God made a woman from the part which he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. Then the man said, this one at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one will be called woman, for she was taken out of man. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and unites with his wife, and they become one family.
That's the other instance. So they become one. The point is family. That's the entire point. Okay, now Meredith didn't want me to write it, but anyway. So God did not tell Adam to unite with Eve until Adam finds Steve. Did y'all get that? Eve, Steve, okay. It is not Adam and Eve, it is Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. No, I just had to throw that in. I thought it was funny. Okay, Mark 10. So Jesus himself says,
So this is when they're asking Jesus about divorce, and Jesus said to them, he wrote this commandment to you because of your hard hearts, but from the beginning of creation, he made them male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate.
and you'll know Rosaria's hit on this a little bit when she speaks at one point, is the idea that, again, that's the point. It's male, female, procreation to create a family, which is what God wanted to be in the first place, which is what he's doing on the earth until he returns and unites both his spiritual family and his earthly family. That uniting of both a human family and a spiritual family as one family of God is the whole point, and that's why he allows us to live for the last 5,000 years. He's developing that ultimate plan. And homosexuality, or any form of union that doesn't do it, and today we're talking about homosexuality. Don't misunderstand, that's just the focus today. That's what a man who goes around and sleeps with 15 women and never commits to any and has children all scattered all over the place and takes care of none of them. It's the same garbage. And there's no difference in that perversion of marriage as it is homosexual perversion of marriage. That's a little bit of that was kind of the fallout in the media narrative from what I say earlier, the moral majority arguments is we focus so hard on that not to realize it's about a family and commitment and all of that, and anything that distorts and destroys that interrupts God's eternal purpose. That's what's happening there. So today we're talking about homosexuality, but it didn't get anybody else off.
Jesus say, love thy neighbor as thyself?
He did. Yes, he did. He absolutely did. Matter of fact, we're actually going to hit on specifically what is love. We're going to sit on that word in a minute and say, okay, Jesus commands us to love him. What does that entail? And that actually surprises people. There's more there. So we're going to hit on that shortly. Okay. Marriage and family I like this, just a little knowledge. Marriage and family was the first institute and created by God. God defines marriage. Marriage was not created by the state, and the state does not have the right to redefine it. Okay, do I go to my best friend's wedding, or to my gay neighbor's wedding? Meredith has an article. Actually, y'all have an article.
This was written to a Christian lady, I guess a blog post, and she answered. This is the question from her blog. Sue, I love my sweet gay neighbors. Does anybody have gay neighbors? We do. We have a gay male couple down the street from us.
Actually, our first house right out of college, we were calling this ball back here. Our first house, while she was in medical school, so I was out of college, I was already where you were in medical school. And it was an area where there's a particular guy in town, I don't know if he's still around or not, but he was in a property investor. He had a whole bunch of real estate, a whole bunch of investment properties, and he was, I believe he was personally homosexual, but he had the gay bars in town. And so everybody he leased to were homosexuals. So on the first street we lived in, virtually every neighbor surrounding us was homosexual. It was interesting. We had wonderful conversations. It's just an interesting time. But anyway,
They
now
had
we
some
just,
wild parties too.
so they had wild parties. I mean, literally, the house next door had phenomenal parties. We turn all the lights out to watch, and they'd all be dressed up. It was quite interesting. But anyway, that was our entertainment back then. But anyway, so then we had lots of gay neighbors. Now we just have one.
Okay, so should we go to our gay neighbors' weddings? Sue, I love my sweet gay neighbors, and after the SCOTUS decision, I figure we'd be invited to a wedding. Do we go? Christians take different positions on this question, just as Christians take different positions on the issue of homosexuality in general and same-sex marriage in particular. I believe that regardless of our feelings on this issue about our friends and our loved ones, we need to follow what the Word of God says. Both the Old and New Testaments clearly state that homosexual behavior is sin. Regardless of how we feel about those who engage in it, the Word of God is internally consistent on this issue. All sex outside of marriage, which is restricted to one woman and one man in a lifetime covenant, violates God's created intent for us. And that includes homosexual sex.
Paul's right there, and we don't have time for me to talk about everything that hits my brain, but that's kind of what I said a minute ago. Kind of let that sink in a minute. God has an ordained order in a lot of different areas. Today we're talking about sex and marriage, but in a lot, he has an ordained order that creates what's best for you and creates the family he desires. So most of what human interaction, human culture is us constantly fighting and perverting that divine order. But you see all through the Bible, sinful people who are radically crazy, even from murderers to worshipers of other gods. God uses them. He uses sinful people. He loves and recognizes that that's who you are. So that's why David, who was a murderer and an adulterer, is known as a man after God's own heart. So we know that God's other side, or the other part of his character, is love and mercy. But he has a divine order, and for that is the truth, and that is what he's trying to establish in our culture. And he wants individual followers and imagers of him to exemplify.
I read somewhere where they were talking about sex in general and families, and what would the world look like if there was no sex outside of marriage, period, between a man and a woman? There would be no divorce. There would be no heartache from that, children from that. There would be no sexual abuse. There would be no pornography. There would be no homosexuality. There would be, that's God's plan for us, the perfect plan. But we're sinful creatures, and he doesn't strike us down when we make mistakes.
Because he's developing his family.
Because it says in 2 Peter, he has long suffering. He wants all to come to repentance. So that's where we address homosexuality, just like every other sin, indwelling sin. So we'll keep going. Redefining marriage does not change the unnatural, sinful nature of same-gender sex. Romans 1. A wedding itself is a communal event.
This is important here because it's something else to put in your mind. What is a wedding? And again, today's culture, weddings are just excuses to have parties, dress up, and to really look awesome and have all the bridesmaids and the greatest dresses.
But what is it
that
really?
That is not what a wedding really is. It's what it's sort of become. What is a wedding?
A wedding is a communal event where society gathers together to witness the union of two people coming together to start a new family.
Paul's right there. So it's a societal event where witnesses, that's why at the end of every service says, is there anyone here who would speak up that these two should not be married?
I don't think they do that anymore.
Well, some tradition would still do it, but for a lot of these, that's what's happening in that. We think of ourselves kind of like the way we think of church now, that we're really just observers being entertained. That is not. You're called to be the witness of that covenant commitment happening on that stage. You are actually held responsible. Gosh, this is so far from our culture now. You are held responsible for the success of that marriage, partially responsible in the way you mentor them and how you talk to them for the success of that marriage when you sit in that audience and give your hearty approval to that marriage. That's what a witness to it. It changes when you get that invitation about whether you should go or not. And I'm talking about to heterosexual marriages when goodwill, this joker ain't gonna last. You've been there, you've been to that wedding, you go, Lord, I'll give this one 6 months at best. Okay, I'm sorry, keep going.
The point of a wedding is that the guests witness, support, bless, and approve the marriage. Contrasted to lovers making promises to each other in a private intimacy, the communal witness and celebration of a wedding elevates and formalizes these vows as a covenant, a promise on steroids.
I like that, a promise on steroids. That's what a wedding is. We make promises all the time, but a wedding with witnesses is a covenant. It's a promise on steroids.
And the new one flesh union becomes a recognized part of the community. So there's a huge difference between having dinner with gay neighbors and attending their wedding. When people attend a wedding, it makes a statement. Attending at a wedding means one is offering support, approval, and blessing to the couple. I suggest that since God has already spoken clearly in the nature of homosexuality, he would not contradict himself to endorse and celebrate what he has declared to be sin, this Leviticus 18:22, and neither should we. Beyond that, the scriptures also direct us not to support other people's behaviors that God calls sin. Ephesians 5:11, do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead expose them. And 1 Timothy 5:22 instructs us not to take part in the sins of others. How can one attend a gay wedding without participating in the deeds of darkness and without taking part in the sin of others? And I'm gonna flip over to the last page. So to answer my friend's question, how can you attend a gay wedding without making a clear statement of support and endorsement, approval and blessing? And since you know what God says about the nature of the relationship as sin, what statement would you be making as his ambassador? I encourage my friend to keep loving her wonderful neighbors.
Here's the trick. That's the main reason we wanted to use this article too, is this. She then says, but this is how you interact.
To continue to be their friends and to be salt and light to them, but not to go to their wedding. And if they ask why, to kindly and lovingly say, I am a Christ follower, and he has spoken about his intention for marriage. Just as he loves you more than you can imagine, I love you too, but I'm so sorry I can't stand with you that day. But I'll look forward to visiting with you as usual on the other side of that day, and I will be praying for you.
Has nothing to do with pushing them away, has nothing to do with condemning them. It just simply says, I can't support it that day. I love you. I will pray for you, and I'll see you tomorrow. I just thought it was kind of a cool way of saying it. We gotta go, because I want you gotta hear Rosaria. But based on what you were just asking a second ago about the verse, we're gonna have to read this. So, what is love? Do you love your gay neighbor? All right, here's the question. Do you love your gay neighbor when you refuse to go to their wedding? That sounds weird. Do I love my neighbor when I refuse to go to their wedding? The answer is yes. You actually love them not by going, you love them by refusing to go. Because the question is, what is love? What is biblical love? That's what we're about to read. 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7.
Love is patient. Love is kind. It is not envious.
Which, by the way, this definition of love immediately tells you, so that way I slammed the door and I kicked them off my street. No. Love is all these things combined, functioning together. So by just definition, you can't love your gay neighbor by not going to the wedding and then treating them like they have a plague. That's backwards. You can't. Love is all of this. Let's start.
Love is patient. Love is kind. It is not envious. Love does not brag. It is not puffed up. It is not rude. It is not self-serving. It is not easily angered or resentful. It is not rejoicing in unrighteousness.
And there's the part right there.
But
love never rejoices in unrighteousness. That's why it is loving to tell your gay neighbor why you can't go to their wedding. Because if you truly love them, you never rejoice in unrighteousness, because what does unrighteousness bring? It brings punishment and condemnation from God. Why would you want that on your neighbor? So if you're a Christian and you understand what God's order is and what he demands, you're loving them by telling them. You're not loving them by closing your mouth and going, yeah, I'm with you. You know what you're doing there? You're being ungodly selfish, because what you want is their approval and you want them to like you. You're being more selfish as opposed to representing God, which is your one mission. What's your one mission? To make what? How do you make a disciple if you don't tell them the truth? You see where this is just a logical argument. If you're serious about being a disciple, it really comes fairly easy. All right, keep going.
And how many times have we read this chapter and not heard that verse? What love is. Love does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth.
There it is.
Bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails.
Just absolutely gorgeous. So understanding that definition of love, love is not defined by our culture. Love in our culture says, grab whoever you love today, and if you love somebody else next week, woohoo! That is not love. All right, let's go.
Okay.
Let's keep going.
Here is 3 gay people.
This is just a part of the video here.
Say hi to Grandma.
Not what you expected? You're still winning when you wake up with Thomas's.
I'll turn it down a little bit.
They're answering this question in their way. 3 people that came out of the gay lifestyle, and they're telling you when they go to their gay friend's wedding.
To me, there's no better person to go to than former gays. They'll tell you what they were thinking.
What? Because I know you guys get it. I get this all the time from people, and it's, they're really sincere and they're very difficult situations to be in. But what do you do if you're a parent and your daughter wants you to go to her gay wedding?
Well, you could just stay out of COVID.
That works these days, right?
I got the Omicron. I think that it's really important to look at. I always look to Scripture, always. So that's always my authority. I gotta go there, and looking at how the Bible begins with a wedding, Genesis 2. The Bible ends with a wedding. Revelation 19. You have the Old Testament where the metaphor of marriage, that Jehovah God is a faithful husband to a harlot, Israel. And then we have the New Testament where Paul talks about the mystery of marriage with Christ, is pointing to Christ and the church. And throughout Jesus' first miracle was at the wedding in Cana. So many instances where this concept of marriage one flesh is a very, very strong, clear vision, and it's something very important to God, that it would be unwise for Christians to try to trivialize something that God certainly does not. So I think we need to be careful, because I know it's very meaningful for people, not going and stuff like that. I wouldn't tell them kind of over a text or a tweet. I mean, if you can do it in person, better. But so I personally would not be able to go to the ceremony.
Right.
I know some people who, especially if it's really close family, they might be there for the weekend, because a lot of times, that's kind of when everyone's getting together. But I wouldn't be able to go to the ceremony because I know that that's not something that God would bless. But I would clearly articulate and look for ways to reach out and to continue that relationship, even though they might not want me to. I know many times parents are like, "Oh, my kids have cut me off." This is even not related to a wedding or not. They've just cut me off. They don't want me in their life. And I said, well, we're only responsible for how we act and respond, not responsible for their actions. So They may have cut you off, but you don't. And you say, I'm sorry that you feel that way. I'm sorry that you feel like you have to cut me off, but I'm not. I'm going to keep loving you, whether you accept it. Then that's not on me. But that's kind of how I would respond.
Yeah, and Rosario, what are your thoughts?
Luke 14:26. If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. It is simply a horrible thing to be divided between your Lord and your child. But the Lord Jesus Christ has already spoken when he says hate, I think, Christopher will have to do that Greek, but my husband tells me that means, love less. It's a rank issue. It's a rank issue. You love your children less than you love your Lord. Because if you don't love your Lord the most, you love your Lord the most over your spouse, over everything. If you don't, you will destroy those people you think you love with a predatory kind of sin that's going to just infect them. But that's the conclusion. Before you get there, you're going to go to your elders and your pastors. You're going to pray and you're going to fast and you're going to give yourself at least 6 months, because prayer does many things, but one of the things it does is it strengthens you to receive the answer that God will give you.
Yeah.
So the Christian life is not a multiple choice exam. There's spiritual integrity that goes with taking up your cross.
Yeah, I just love her. She just spoke for probably
Thank you,
less
Mark.
than, she probably spoke for like 55 seconds. And there are 3 nuggets in what she said that are so deep. Oh, like at the end, the Christian life. Oh no, what was? Oh, I think I wrote one of them down because it's like, where is that? If you don't love your Lord the most, you will destroy. And I love to do this. You will destroy those people you think you love with listen to this, a predatory kind of sin that is going to infect them. That's amazing, because she's been in the lifestyle for 20-something years. She knows it's a predatory sin that will eat you up. So you look at your child and go, I'm with you, I'm there that day. You are literally not loving them. You are placing them on the altar of a predatory sin that will destroy them. And it totally changes what it means to love someone. What it means is to protect them from what you know that will harm them. Isn't that wild? She's just amazing. There is a spirit, I love this. There is a spiritual integrity that comes with taking up your cross. That's where so much of the church has failed. There's a spiritual integrity with doing it right. So much of it's compromised. We don't do it right. Okay. By definition, there'll be conflict when you hold to the truth. Covenant marriage, I'm going to skip on that because we're going to go, which is really cool. Y'all can read that on your own. Sexual orientation, and can you be both a Christian and a homosexual? And so we're just going to listen to Rosaria for a few minutes, and we're going to pause and skip around a little bit until we run out of time. Oh, I can keep talking there. It's not there yet. Let me see where I am. This is back to the continuing of the video we watched last week. So it's just Beckett and
When you hear cough, cough,
the cough sneeze commercial.
it's time for Plop, Plop, Fizz, Fizz. Alka-Seltzer Plus Cold Brew.
Mark, did you use that?
Yeah, I guess Alka-Seltzer Plus.
So all of my lesbian peers, we had experiences with men. So some of us had been married and had children with men, and we just called ourselves informed lesbians. That's all we were. We weren't like, oh, I have no idea what I'm missing. No, we really did. And so then the Lord had to really impress upon me that there was something more to being human than having a sexual orientation. And what was kind of interesting about that is I'm a 19th century scholar, so I'm a romantic and Victorian literature, and that Freud, Hegel, Marx, and Darwin were my kind of go-to philosophers. And so I actually knew, I had studied and even taught how sexual orientation as a category of personhood first entered the world. And so I knew it wasn't like as old as Adam or somehow kind of natural. I knew it was a socially constructed category of personhood with a political agenda and an evolutionary one as well. And so I had to, I just, how it is when you I don't know, when your whole life turns upside down, you have to wonder, well, how much of my own feedback loop have I been, drinking? Is lesbian who I am, or is it how I feel? And
Okay, we're just gonna pause there just so I'll make comments. Again, she just has so much depth in what she says. I know how again, this is a PhD level professor at Syracuse who was the head of women's studies and is leading other PhD candidates in those areas. This is someone that's just, so with all of her studying, she says, I knew how sexual orientation as a category of personhood first entered the world as a social construct category of personhood. In other words, she had studied it. She knew this didn't date back to the ancient times and with Adam and Eve. She knew it was a construct for political, social, moral reasons built. Because she studied Hegel, she studied the great philosophers, and she realized that's what it was. The very thing that community, or excuse me, the partial part of those communities now claim that heterosexual is, that's patriarchy, and that was a social construct.
Critiques that in Screwtape letters, where Screwtape is talking to Wormwood, and he says, no, don't let your person start to struggle with identity. Let's make sure he gets a toothache.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, no.
And I love, by the way, I love Carl Trueman's book on the modern self, but that's such a great book. But
Yeah. So I had to think about those things, and I had to pray about those things. And I remember one night, so at this point, my lesbian partner moved out, but then some other women who were lesbians who lived in my house were there, and I remember, I remember just praying that the Lord would make me a godly woman. That just like, in fact, I remember one of the women from church just saying, Rosaria, just give it up and pray that the Lord would make you a godly woman. I don't even, and so I did. I went that night and I prayed that the Lord would make me a godly woman, and then I laughed out loud because that was such a hilarious prayer. And then one of my housemates, who's a Wiccan witch, is knocking on my door. Are you okay in there?
wow.
But that was, prayer is really powerful. If you pray that the Lord will, in fact, and what Jill said was right. I'm playing with fire. You're playing with fire. You want to follow Jesus. I would not say the biggest question is, do you love Jesus? I would say the biggest question is, does Jesus love you? And one of the ways you know is, are you willing to love Jesus more than your notions? Are you willing to pray and ask God to help you to hate your sin without hating yourself? Do you want to really see your sin through the crosshairs, so that you can actually, as John Owen would say, mortify it, or do you just want to see it in a selfie at a conference?
Right.
Like, oh, hey, here I am at a conference with all the other people who sin just the way I do, and look at all of us, we're having a great time.
Yeah.
How do you want to see your sin? And so those were hard but good moments. And I should tell you that the church was amazing, right? This was an amazing church. And I remember, one day going to the women in the church and feeling a little pouty, like, oh, look at all the things I have to give up. And I remember somebody saying, why don't you walk around this whole church and ask people what they had to give up for Jesus, and then come back to me and tell me if you have to give up more. Okay?
Amen. I love that.
And so, I don't know, these were people who loved me and who just were willing to tell the truth. And there was this God who loved me and was willing to tell the truth. And so,
I just had to pause right there. Listen to this. Just let that sink in. There were women in the church who loved me enough to tell me the truth, and a God who loved me enough to tell me the truth. But listen to what she just said. She's complaining. Can you imagine? I'd love to know what this church was. Can you imagine? She says, she's hearing her complain, and she says, Rosaria, walk the halls, and you ask any person you walk in, and what did you have to give up for Jesus, and then come back. And she did. And she did. Can you imagine that? I mean, just that's weird. What a community. That's really what we ought to be about. Can you imagine on the way to church this morning, you just stopped on your way all the way to the sanctuary, and you just pick random people. What did you have to give up? First, most people would be like, I mean, in our culture, our kind of stuffy Christianity, we would have no earthly idea. I mean, we after we thought about it, we could answer it, but nobody would. I just found it interesting. I'd like to know what the culture of that church was. That you can walk down that hall and just ask people, and they tell you, here's what I gave up. Part of it has to do with they were in California, so they were all coming out of crazy backgrounds and mess. But anyway, I just found that interesting.
That was a powerful time, but yes, it was 2 years, and one of the things that I learned through being married to Kent Butterfield, now, well over 20 years, is that the covenant of Christian marriage is not just two heterosexual Christians doing whatever they want. That the covenant of Christian marriage is learning to be one flesh.
Right.
And it's for that reason, and I'm not, let me be very careful. I am not suggesting that marriage is a solution to any kind of sin pattern. So I'm not suggesting, I don't want anybody to hear like, oh, this is what I'm struggling with, let me go get married, and that's gonna solve my problems. No, but there is such a blessing in covenant marriage that I would be so remiss if I said, if I failed to say that. That learning to be one flesh and learning to be one mind is, as a Christian, in a Christian covenant of marriage, is part of how God changed me and healed me and heals me, still heals me.
Wow.
And so, people say, well, what's your sexual, orientation now? I have a long lecture on how sexual orientation is not actually a category of personhood, and we can go there.
Which we'll get to in a minute.
But I would just say is that my affection and attraction is for my husband. And that's it.
Yeah.
And I think that's great.
Yeah.
As a pastor's wife, I counsel a lot of women, and let me tell you what, it would be, to really keep yourself on a short leash as a Christian, it's a really good thing, and God will bless you and give you great happiness and joy. But it's totally different. Being one flesh is a totally different thing than just two Christians in a marriage doing whatever they want. And so that's why I think the whole category of gay Christianity, mixed orientation marriage, I think is a travesty. I think it makes mockery of any number of things. The gospel would be one of those.
Right. And so also, at a certain point, you resigned from your job, right? And your friend, I think I can't remember which book you talked about this in, but your friends were like, why are you doing this? You're destroying your life. You worked so hard to get your PhD and your tenure, and like, so how did you? I guess it just became untenable to keep doing what you were doing.
Yeah, well, yeah. I was married. I was married to a pastor in Virginia, and I wasn't going to keep a lectern in New York. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't going to happen. And we couldn't work as a team, as a ministry team, if I did that.
Was it a difficult? Not a difficult decision, but was it a strange decision for you to just say, okay, I'm out of here, I'm done with this?
It was terrifying. It was terrifying, and even my dean, my academic dean, the president. I had all kinds of people, kind of like, why don't we slow down? Why don't you take another sabbatical? Let's not make this decision really fast. You can work remotely. It was so hard. It was so scary and hard, and really even good Christian friends saying things like, well, no, this doesn't make sense. How about if Kent becomes the stay-at-home dad, and you keep you're gonna leave a tenured position at a tiered research university to be a church planter's wife? That's what idiots do, right?
Right.
And then people would say things like, you'll never write any more books, you'll never have a life of the mind, you'll never, ever, and by God's grace alone, I don't think I would have been able, I've written a lot, the books I've written since throwing my life away, apparently, have been much better books than the books I'd written before. I've written more than the books you've held up, and that's good.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't have the full list here, the full bibliography. But what about your students? The students that you were closely connected with at that time, were they just like, what is going on with you? You're leaving. What is happening?
Well, and that's, I think, what we need to realize too, that my students and and my lesbian partner and my lesbian colleagues,
Here's a
they
key point.
felt betrayed because they were betrayed.
They felt betrayed because they were betrayed.
I betrayed them. I betrayed them by following Jesus. When I betrayed them, I stopped. I stopped directing.
We wanted to pause right there, because you hear that? I thought she's so honest. I just like her. She said, she didn't candy coat it. She said, I did betray them. I betrayed my students. I betrayed my lesbian partner. I betrayed every one of them. I think if we continue, but she says, I betrayed them for Jesus. I betrayed them for him, because think about it, and that immediately brought in my mind, what's the scripture we've been reading where Jesus said, if no man leaves his father and mother and hates his brother and that kind of stuff, that concept of strife. I came to bring a sword and division, not peace. And she realized that. So yeah, she found that interesting, that she realized, yes, I betrayed them, but I betrayed them for truth. And that is what you're called to do. And that's just an interesting way, the way she said it. Do you want how we do it on time?
Also, I just want to say the marriage, the whole idea is that God has a perfect plan for marriage. And again, what she's saying is two heterosexuals living together doing what they want is also not God's plan for a marriage. And we in the church have the same divorce rate as any non-Christian. And so it makes me convicted, like, am I learning to become one flesh? Am I really understanding what God's purpose is for marriage? And that's the whole idea of being unequally yoked. We shouldn't go to that wedding, what Joel's saying. We shouldn't support that. I mean, I had an instance where I spoke the truth in love to someone very close to me about concerns about a marriage, and it was because I loved her. Are you sure slow down? This is not what God wants for you. And only because I loved her. It would have been a lot easier to walk away and say, do what you want to do, everything's great, yeah, he's good for you. No, because I saw the path, I had to step out and say, I love you too much to agree with this. So, anyway.
I think we probably ought to stop there. Golly, it just kills me when America's so right. This is great. It just, as the more of this video I watch, it's just, she's so powerful. I love listening to her. There's probably about another 10, 12 minutes. So what we'll probably do is plug that little 10, 12 minutes into next week, and then we'll go ahead and start. We'll grab the next thing. But I hope that was very helpful.
You said what? That marriage was light?
I know it, because she kept saying, this is 3 weeks. I'm like, no, we can do that. Well, in my defense, our normal way of doing this is we do all this, we we finished all the notes, and then
It's gonna be my fault.
Yeah, it's gonna be your fault. We read through it, we worked through it one time, and that's when you realize, okay, it's 20 minutes too long, and you start cutting. She went off and played at the hospital last night, none of that happened. And so I was by myself on the bed this morning going, I think we can cut the video, and I cut like 4 minutes. Well, that clearly wasn't enough. So yeah, still playing.
Hey Joel, let me mention, so this week is ironic, kind of on a different note. I had lunch with this very successful businessman.
We didn't have lunch this week.
No, I know, that's next week. Oh, okay. But he owned a number of different businesses, he owned manufacturing companies, and he sold them off. Obviously, he's done very, very well. He was just kind of telling me, well, I've been importing a lot of this and that. He said, and he got to talking about, somebody just drifted off in his marriage. He said, yeah, my wife and I live kind of in separate houses. I have a house down on the beach, and she lives. So he said, we basically, I've been gone for about, out of a year, I'd be gone for about 260 days out of a day out of the year. And that's the way my life was, and we just kind of agreed that's the way our life was. And I'm just thinking, what kind of marriage is that? So it doesn't necessarily, the back to the homosexual and the heterosexual. I mean, it's just, I was like, man, what a dysfunctional situation. I'd like to know, how do your children? I mean, what have you missed? I mean, but he's, as the world would see it, man, he's on top. He can do anything he wants to do. I mean, he's got all the money in the world. I mean, from the world's view. And it's like, man, what a sad reality of where your life is now. I mean, this is a guy that was older than me, but and so anyhow, it just was just kind of a sobering thought to think, reflect on your own life. Lord, I thank you, because I could have been there too sometimes. You know, I could see myself in those situations and find myself where that would be, and I'd have nothing to really show for it. You know, that's not really what it's about. So,
Man, that is so insightful. That's why at the beginning, we always start with, what is our mission and what is our goal? And that's what happens is that guy, that businessman never understood. At some point, he didn't understand that his mission was to make disciples in the image of Christ. And he probably is a Christian. I bet, maybe.
maybe, I
bet
don't
he
know.
would claim to be. That's a better
Probably
way to say
not,
it.
but he was a moral guy.
Yes,
Let's say
so he
that.
would probably claim, well, yeah, I believe in Christ. I mean, generally folks say that, but whether they're
Yeah.
really Christian or not, I don't know
Yeah,
if you would.
yeah.
But that's why I keep going back to, if you stay focused on what God, if you are a follower of Jesus Christ and you've committed to that, and you stay focused on what He wants for you and your mission in life, that will stop you from going into those places.
And it's harder
But
to see
without
that
that, you're
now.
deceived.
It's a lot easier to see that now where we are in life
Yeah,
as
yeah.
opposed to where they are.
Oh,
Because
amen.
they're looking at things, I mean, it's so much more, I mean, I look back 40 years from now, and I look, man, life is just so much different, and look at it so differently now.
Yeah.
And because when you're kind of in, toward the tail end, you know.
Second
one
half,
more.
I'd rather just say the
The
second
last
half.
third.
One more food for thought. I encounter at work, I encounter Jehovah's Witnesses, and happen to say something like Merry Christmas, or did you see your family for Christmas, or something like that. And a patient said, you know, we don't celebrate Christmas, we don't celebrate the holiday, we don't celebrate. So obviously I forgot that she was Jehovah's Witness. But anyway, sometimes what ways we can address people about things like this is our faith, my Bible, my Jesus says that I can't go to your wedding. And you know, in some ways, like cults, like Jehovah's Witness, they stand behind something. I can't do that because of my faith. And maybe we need to be more vocal and personal about it. Like, I love you and I want you to know Christ, but I can't stand with you in this covenant of marriage. My Bible says that I can't do that because of my faith.
Because I love you.
Because I love you, I want you to know the truth. So,
Wow. Any other thoughts? Now that we've ended early, not really, but anyway.
really.
What are your thoughts?
Should there be a respect if you approach it like that?
That's the thing, is I always point to Jesus, speak the truth in love like He did. He addressed sin, but He always cared for the person and loved them.
I would feel like if you're being invited to someone's wedding, there should be a level of respect there, and they know that you follow the book, you know, like, whether or not they believe it, you know, whether or not they believe it, this is how you guide your life, and they've seen it, and so they like, I don't agree with you, I think you're stupid,
Right.
but I can respect it because you follow it in other ways, and you're not wishy-washy, so I'm gonna respect that.
And why do we shy away from that as Christians?
I would hope they would.
We have the truth. We're not Jehovah's Witnesses. We have the truth, but we shy away from saying it.
Remember, what's the title? I like these titles. I'm big into subtitles and show that. What's the subtitle to our class? Next Gen. That's like Next Gen doing what? Equipping warriors. That's why we're doing this study. Is as uncomfortable and as crazy as it may be, we are equipping you and ourselves to be the warrior in this culture, to represent and image God, to make disciples your one mission. That's why I'm going to repeat that every single study. We have one mission and one mission only. Anything, even if it's I want to be accepted by my gay neighbor, so I'm going to pretend like I support it. If you're not making a disciple, not imaging Him, you have missed your mission and you are deceived.
So really we should ask ourselves, do I love Him enough to share the truth?
Yeah, I used to tell Merritt this all the time when we were just talking about friends and all, and I would just say things that, or you know someone is not your real friend when they never disagree with you. You just know that. You know what I'm talking about. You know those friends that, hey, I could say anything. They're gonna be, yeah, absolutely. Because they have nothing invested in you, and your ultimate destination means nothing to them. They never think of that, but that's what's happening there. That's why when your mom says you're hanging around with the bad crowd, that's really what she's meaning. You're hanging around with people who are selfishly wanting to party and play, but they have no understand or no care really. If you went too far and you overdosed when they didn't, they'll walk away from you in a heartbeat and keep that crazy lifestyle. I don't mean to get off on crazy examples, but you know those folks. If you care about something, you know there's a difference between you talking to your brother, your sister, your mother, if you have that relationship, and you talking to an acquaintance. There just is. And what God's calling us to do is make a lot more people like your mother, brother, and sister, and a lot less like your acquaintances. That's really what He's calling us. And that's thinking hard. Man, it's hard.
It's hard.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, one other thing, just, I don't know if shared this with our class before, but I had a gay brother who died of AIDS almost 13 years ago, and I shared these things with him, and the sad part of it all is I saw the end of his life, and I saw how tragic it was, and it tears me up. I mean, I know what his life was like. I mean, I had to be the executive of his estate, and I had to go through all these things, and it was so terrible having to see a life that had so much potential. I mean, the things that he did toward the tail end of his life, where he was so miserable, because he knew the truth, and I would share. I mean, it was just this, like you said. I mean, you loved him enough to share those things, but man, it just, you don't see that side of it, and it's a terrible, terrible. I mean, sin has its consequences, and that lifestyle has a terrible, terrible ending. Terrible ending.
Yeah, this may sound a little good. How many of y'all know who Freddie Mercury is? This age? Y'all still know, because he's on. I am fascinated by him. It reminded me when you said your brother. I mean, your brother is Freddie Mercury. Flaming homosexual, very mentally disturbed, not like crazy, mentally disturbed, and constantly questioning and wondering. And you can hear it in some of his music. You hear it in a lot of his music. I'm not like a huge fan of all his music, but I listen to it because you can hear what you're saying. You can hear that yearning, and he died of AIDS. And at the end of his life, he knew he had wasted his life, but he never understood. He never knew where to turn, and he never did. And anyway, so your story reminds me of Freddie Mercury's story. That was, of course, the lead singer of Queen. And I'm just fascinated by people like that, and it burdens me. Anyway.
And what you're saying is what we as Christians that aren't involved in that lifestyle, we don't understand. They are down the path of self-destruction. And whether it's lesbianism or gay, they don't have to die of HIV to have destruction. I mean, you heard what she said. People were on suicide watch all the time at our house. I mean, we have the answer to that. And we're trying to normalize it and say it's okay. You can have the same kind of marriage and family that we have.
If you look at those...
And that's not God's plan.
Yeah, if you look at those topics, one of the topics we're going to hit on is how the church has stood up in the past, and kind of a call to stand up again. And what's going on right now, even within some of our Southern Baptist groups, what's going on right now is exactly what Mary said, normalizing. We have a clip in one of these videos of a Southern Baptist, was it seminary or former president of the Southern Baptist Convention? One of them was one, but anyway. Yeah, we'll probably show it some, but I think this particular one was seminary, who basically apologized for preaching against homosexuality in the past. And we're like, do you know what you're doing? Do you have any clue what you're doing? Anyway, it just is. Anyway.
Praise out.
All right, we gotta get out of here. We gotta get out of here. And yes, it's really a 3-week. We'll do a little piece of this for next week just to wrap it up. Dear Lord, thank you so much. Golly, this was a heavy one, Lord. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Help us to understand and learn how to image you. And in this case, with our homosexual friends, with our neighbors, with our classmates, and with our family members, Lord, help us, number one, to love them. Love them. Love them. We cannot push them away. We love them at all costs because our goal is to make a disciple of yours. Father, thank you. Be with everybody. Bring us back next week as we tackle another issue. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.